The stranger's horse collapsed in the snow 300 yards from the cabin, and Katrina Gibson watched through the frosted window as the figure stumbled forward through waist-deep drifts, bent against the wind that had been howling for 6 hours straight. It was December 1883, and the blizzard that had swept down from the mountains into Redding, California, was unlike anything the region had seen in living memory. Most people thought of California as eternal sunshine and gold mines, but here in the northern reaches, winter could bare its teeth when it wanted to. Katrina set down the rifle she had been holding and pushed open the heavy wooden door, immediately regretting it as snow and ice blasted into the small cabin. "Here," she shouted into the white chaos. "Follow my voice." The figure lurched toward her, and she could see now it was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark coat crusted with ice. He stumbled through the doorway, and she threw her weight against the door, forcing it closed against the wind's fury. The wooden bar dropped into place with a solid thunk that seemed to seal them away from the world. The stranger collapsed onto his knees, breathing hard, ice crystals clinging to his dark beard and the brim of his hat. Katrina stood back, suddenly aware that she was alone in a remote cabin with a man she had never seen before, and the storm outside showed no signs of letting up. "Thank you," he gasped, pulling off his gloves with shaking hands. "My horse, I need to get my horse." "Your horse is dead or will be soon," Katrina said bluntly, though not unkindly. "Nothing survives out there right now. You barely made it yourself." The man's face, what she could see of it beneath the ice and the shadow of his hat, tightened with grief. He nodded slowly, accepting the hard truth. "I had him for 8 years. I am sorry for your loss," Katrina said, and meant it. She understood the bond between a rider and their mount. Her own horse, Juniper, was safely tucked in the small stable attached to the back of the cabin, probably warmer than the 2 humans in the main room. "But right now, we need to get you warm before you lose any fingers or toes." She moved to the fireplace, where a decent blaze was already going, and added 2 more logs. The stranger pulled himself to his feet and made his way closer to the heat, his movements stiff and painful. Katrina filled a pot with snow from the bucket by the door and hung it over the fire to melt. "I am Kenneth Garrett," the man said, finally removing his hat. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair plastered to his forehead and eyes the color of creek water in summer. "I was heading to Redding when the storm hit. Thought I could make it through." "Danielle Ellis," Katrina replied, then caught herself. "I mean, Katrina Ellis. Danielle was my sister." Something flickered across Kenneth's face, a recognition of grief in her slip of the tongue, but he did not press. "How far are we from town?" "About 8 miles. Might as well be 800 in this weather." Katrina pulled a blanket from the wooden chest against the wall and handed it to him. "You need to get out of those wet clothes. I will turn around." She heard him moving behind her, the rustle of frozen fabric, his sharp intake of breath as he peeled layers away from cold skin. When he told her it was safe to look, he was wrapped in the blanket, his wet clothes draped over the backs of the 2 wooden chairs she had pulled near the fire. "I have some stew left from yesterday," Katrina said, trying to keep her voice steady. She was 22 years old and had been living alone in this cabin for 3 months, ever since her sister Danielle had died of fever. Before that, they had shared the space, 2 young women trying to make a life for themselves after their parents had passed. Danielle had been the stronger one, the braver one. Katrina was still learning how to be alone. "That would be wonderful," Kenneth said, his teeth still chattering slightly. She ladled the thick venison stew into 2 tin bowls and handed him one. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the relentless howl of the wind outside. The cabin was small but well built, her father's handiwork from years ago when he had first claimed this land. One main room with the fireplace, a sleeping area partially separated by a curtain, and the small stable attached at the back where Juniper nickered occasionally, sensing the storm. "This is good," Kenneth said finally. "Thank you. I know this is not an ideal situation for you." Katrina met his eyes and saw genuine concern there, an acknowledgement of the awkwardness and potential danger of their circumstances. "It is not ideal for either of us, but the alternative was watching you freeze to death, and I am not that hard-hearted. Still, I appreciate it. And I want you to know I mean you no harm. I have a rifle," Katrina said evenly, "and I know how to use it." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I do not doubt it." They finished eating, and Katrina collected the bowls, washing them in the warm water that now steamed gently over the fire. Outside, the wind seemed to be picking up strength rather than dying down. She moved to the window and tried to peer out, but the glass was completely obscured by ice and driving snow. "How long do storms like this usually last up here?" Kenneth asked. "A day, sometimes two, but I have never seen one this fierce." Katrina turned back to face him. "We have enough wood to keep the fire going for several days if we are careful. Food for maybe a week. Water is not a problem with all this snow." Kenneth nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around himself. His color was better now, the dangerous pallor fading from his cheeks. "What were you doing out here alone, if you do not mind me asking?" Katrina hesitated, then decided there was no harm in the truth. They were going to be trapped together until the storm passed. "My sister and I inherited this place from our parents. We were trying to run a small ranch, just a few cattle and horses. Then Danielle got sick in September. By October she was gone. I have been trying to keep things going on my own, but it is harder than I thought it would be. I am sorry about your sister. So am I." Katrina sat down in the chair opposite him, keeping a respectful distance. "What about you? What brings you to Redding in the middle of winter?" "Work, mostly. I am a ranch hand, go where the jobs are. Heard they were hiring at the big spread just outside town, the Morrison place. Figured I would try my luck." He paused. "I have been drifting since my father died 2 years back. We had a small farm in Colorado, but I could not keep it going alone. Sold it for what little I could get and have been moving ever since." There was something in his voice, a weariness that Katrina recognized. The exhaustion of being alone, of carrying grief like a stone in your chest while still trying to move forward. "That must be difficult," she said quietly. "It is what it is. You learn to adapt or you do not survive." Kenneth shifted in his seat, wincing slightly. "May I ask why you stayed, after your sister passed? This is a hard life for a woman alone." Katrina bristled slightly at the implication, then realized he was not being condescending, just truthful. "Where else would I go? This is my home. My family is buried here, and I am not helpless." "I did not mean to suggest you were, but ranching is hard work, physical work. I manage." She did not mention the cattle she had lost to predators, or the fence line she had not been able to repair before winter, or the loneliness that sometimes felt like it would swallow her whole. The wind rattled the shutters, and a cold draft snaked across the floor despite the fire. Kenneth noticed her shiver and frowned. "Is it always this drafty?" "There is a gap, somewhere I have not been able to find. It gets worse when the wind comes from the north like this." He stood up, keeping the blanket wrapped around himself, and began to move slowly around the perimeter of the cabin, holding his hand out to feel for the draft. Katrina watched him, this stranger who had stumbled into her life in the middle of a blizzard, now helping her find the weakness in her shelter. "Here," he said finally, near the corner where the wall met the floor. "Do you have any rags or old cloth?" She brought him what she had, and he stuffed them carefully into the gap, using a knife from the table to push them deep into the crack. Almost immediately, the cold air flow diminished. "That should help," he said, returning to his seat by the fire. "When the storm passes and I can get to town, I will send someone back with proper materials to fix it right. You do not have to do that, I know, but I want to. You saved my life tonight." They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell outside, though it was hard to tell through the wall of white beyond the windows. Katrina lit 2 oil lamps, their warm glow pushing back the shadows. She found herself studying Kenneth when she thought he was not looking. He had a strong face, weathered by sun and wind and hard work, but there was kindness in it too. His hands, large and calloused, moved with surprising gentleness when he adjusted the blanket or reached for the cup of hot coffee she had prepared. "You should take the bed," Katrina said when the hour grew late. "I will sleep in the chair." "Absolutely not. You are already being generous enough letting me stay. I will take the floor by the fire." They argued about it for a few minutes before reaching a compromise. Katrina would sleep in her bed behind the curtain, and Kenneth would make a pallet on the floor near the fireplace with the extra blankets and the bearskin rug. It was not ideal, but it would keep him warm enough. Katrina lay awake for a long time that first night, listening to the storm rage and the stranger breathe on the other side of the thin curtain. She thought about Danielle, who would have known exactly what to say in this situation, who would have put Kenneth at ease with her easy laugh and quick wit. Katrina had always been the quiet one, the serious one. Now she was just the alone one. She must have finally slept because she woke to gray light filtering through the window and the smell of coffee brewing. Katrina pushed aside the curtain to find Kenneth, now dressed in his own clothes though they were still slightly damp, tending the fire and setting the coffee pot on the heat. "I hope you do not mind," he said when he saw her. "I thought I would make myself useful." "Not at all." Katrina moved to the window and felt her heart sink. The snow had piled so high against the door that it was visible through the gap at the bottom. The window showed nothing but white. "We are snowed in." Kenneth came to look over her shoulder. "Completely buried. I have seen blizzards, but this is something else." They spent the morning assessing their situation. The door would not budge more than an inch against the weight of snow packed against it. The windows were frozen shut and buried besides. The stable was accessible through the interior door at the back, and they found Juniper warm and content, though surprised to see a stranger. Kenneth had a way with horses, Katrina noticed. He spoke to the mare in a low, soothing voice and ran his hands expertly over her legs, checking for problems. "She is a fine animal," he said. "Good bone structure. You have taken good care of her." "She was Danielle's horse originally, but we bonded after." Katrina trailed off. "Animals know when we need them," Kenneth said simply. They rationed out hay for Juniper and returned to the main room. The storm was still raging outside, showing no signs of weakening. Katrina felt a flutter of anxiety in her chest. Being snowed in for a day was one thing, but if this continued— "We should take inventory," Kenneth suggested, as if reading her thoughts. "See exactly what we have to work with." They went through the cabin systematically. Katrina had laid in supplies for winter, though she had been planning for one person, not two. There were sacks of flour and cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, a few precious potatoes stored in the root cellar accessible through a trapdoor in the floor, coffee, sugar, and the venison from a deer she had managed to shoot 2 weeks ago. Not a feast, but enough to keep 2 people alive for a while if they were careful. "We will be fine," Kenneth said, though Katrina noticed he was calculating in his head, probably coming to the same conclusions she was. Fine, but only if the storm ended soon. By the second day, the wind had somehow grown even stronger. The cabin creaked and groaned under the assault, and Katrina found herself flinching at every sound, wondering if the roof would hold. Kenneth noticed her tension and tried to distract her with stories of his travels, tales of the places he had been and the people he had met. "I worked on a ranch in Montana for a while," he said as they sat by the fire that evening, sharing another sparse meal. "The owner had this old dog, meanest-looking creature you ever saw, half-wolf by the look of him. Everyone was terrified of this dog, but one day I found him with his paw caught in a fence, whimpering like a puppy. I got him free and bandaged his paw, and from that day on, he followed me everywhere. Would not leave my side." "What happened to him?" Katrina asked. "When I left, he stayed with the ranch. That was his home. But the owner wrote me a letter a few months later saying the dog still slept in front of the bunkhouse where I used to stay." Kenneth smiled, but there was sadness in it. "I think about him sometimes, wonder if he is still waiting." Katrina felt something shift in her chest, a softening toward this man who showed such tenderness for a dog he had left behind. "You could go back. Maybe someday. But there is nothing for me there now. The ranch changed hands. New owner would not know me. Still, the dog would remember." Kenneth looked at her, and something passed between them, an understanding of what it meant to be remembered, to matter to someone. "Maybe you are right." On the third day, they woke to an eerie silence. The wind had stopped. Katrina's heart leaped with hope until she looked out the window and saw that the snow was falling harder than ever, fat flakes dropping straight down in the still air, piling up at an alarming rate. "This is worse," Kenneth said grimly. The wind at least kept some areas clear. "This will bury everything." He was right. By midday, the windows were completely obscured, pressed dark by the weight of snow against them. The cabin felt smaller, the walls closing in. Katrina fought back panic, focusing on the tasks at hand: cooking, cleaning, caring for Juniper. Kenneth worked beside her, chopping vegetables, hauling water, feeding the fire. They moved around each other in the small space with increasing ease, developing an unspoken rhythm. "Tell me about your sister," Kenneth said that evening as they sat in their usual spots by the fire. "If you want to, I mean. Sometimes it helps to talk about them." Katrina was quiet for a long moment. She had not spoken about Danielle to anyone, had kept her grief locked inside like a feral thing that might escape if she opened her mouth. But something about the intimacy of their situation, the enforced closeness, made the words come easier. "She was funny," Katrina said finally. "That is what I remember most. She could find humor in anything. When our mother died, I thought I would drown in sadness, but Danielle kept me afloat with her terrible jokes and silly songs. And she was brave, so brave. When she got sick, she never complained, never asked why her. She just fought until she had no fight left. She sounds remarkable. She was. And I was always in her shadow, which was fine. I liked it there. But now she is gone and I have to be both of us, and I do not know how." The confession burst out of Katrina before she could stop it, and she felt tears burning her eyes. Kenneth did not tell her it would be okay, did not offer empty platitudes. Instead, he said, "You do not have to be both of you, you just have to be yourself. That is enough. What if it is not? It will be. You are still here, still fighting. That takes its own kind of courage." Katrina wiped her eyes and looked at him. In the firelight, his face was gentle, understanding. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her. A frightened girl playing at rancher. Or something more. The fourth day brought a new problem. The weight of the snow on the roof had caused a small leak, water dripping steadily into a bucket they positioned in the corner. Kenneth climbed up on the chair to examine the ceiling, his face grave. "I cannot fix it from inside, and there is no way to get on the roof in this storm. We just have to hope it holds." That night, they lay awake listening to the roof creak ominously overhead. Katrina found herself praying to a god she was not sure she believed in anymore, bargaining for their survival. Let us live through this, and I will be better, do better, be the person Danielle thought I could be. Katrina. Kenneth's voice came soft through the darkness. Yes, I am glad I ended up here. I know that sounds strange given the circumstances. But if I was going to be trapped in a blizzard, I am glad it was with you. Katrina's breath caught. She thought about how to respond, what to say that would not reveal the confused tangle of feelings growing inside her. I am glad you made it to the cabin, she said finally. I would not have wanted to be alone through this. On the 5th day, the coffee ran out. It should not have mattered as much as it did, but somehow the loss of that small comfort hit them both hard. They sat in gloomy silence that morning, sipping hot water and pretending it was something more. My mother used to make this drink from roasted chicory root, Kenneth said. Tasted terrible, but it was hot and bitter enough to trick you into thinking it was coffee. My father would put a little whiskey in his coffee on cold mornings, said it warmed him from the inside out. Katrina paused. I have some whiskey. We could put it in the hot water. They tried it and agreed it was awful, but it made them laugh, and laughter had been in short supply. Kenneth told her more stories, and Katrina found herself sharing memories she had not thought about in years. Her first horse, the summer she and Danielle had built a raft and tried to float down the creek, the winter her father had taught her to shoot by having her aim at snowballs he threw in the air. You were happy here, Kenneth observed. I was. We all were before everything fell apart. Katrina stared into the fire. Do you think happiness like that comes around more than once, or is it something you only get for a little while? I think it comes as often as we let it. The hard part is being open to it after you have lost it before. His words settled into her like seeds in warm earth. She thought about what it would mean to be open to happiness again, to let someone in past the walls she had built around her heart. The 6th day was the hardest yet. They were running low on firewood, down to the last logs from the stack Kenneth had brought inside before the storm worsened. To conserve wood, they let the fire burn lower, and the cold crept in at the edges of the room. They sat closer together, sharing blankets, their breath visible in the air. Tell me something you have never told anyone, Kenneth said, his shoulder pressed against hers. Why? Because we might die in this cabin, and I want to know something true about you. Katrina considered this. The cold was making her light-headed, or maybe it was the proximity to him, the warmth of his body beside hers. I am afraid, she said quietly. All the time. I pretend to be strong, but inside I am terrified. Of failing, of losing everything, of being alone forever. Kenneth was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I am afraid too. I have been afraid since my father died, since I lost the only home I ever knew. I keep moving because if I stay still, the fear catches up with me. What are you afraid of? Mattering to people. Because everyone I have ever mattered to is gone now. My mother, my father, even that damn dog in Montana. It is easier to keep drifting than to put down roots that might get torn up again. Katrina turned to look at him and found his face inches from hers. His eyes were serious, vulnerable in a way she had not seen before. You matter to me, she said, and realized it was true. In less than a week, this stranger had become important to her in ways she could not fully explain. You matter to me too, Kenneth said softly. The moment stretched between them, fragile and charged. Then Kenneth reached up and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Katrina leaned into the touch, starved for human contact, for tenderness. We should not, she whispered, but she was not sure what she was prohibiting. A kiss. More, the feelings growing between them. I know, Kenneth replied, but he did not move away. In the end, it was Katrina who closed the distance, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was both tentative and desperate. Kenneth responded immediately, his arms coming around her, pulling her closer. They kissed like people drowning, clinging to each other in the cold and the dark and the uncertainty. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Katrina said, "This is crazy. We barely know each other. I know, but I feel like I have known you much longer than 6 days. So do I." They held each other through the night, fully clothed and wrapped in blankets, drawing comfort from shared warmth and the steady beat of two hearts refusing to give up. The 7th day brought a change. The snow stopped falling. They could tell because the oppressive darkness pressing against the windows lightened slightly, from black to gray. But the silence was total, absolute, as if they had been buried alive. "We need to dig out," Kenneth said. "Even just a small tunnel to get air flowing through. I am worried about the fire consuming all the oxygen in here." It was a valid concern. Katrina had been feeling light-headed for the past day, and she noticed Kenneth moving more slowly too. They began to dig at the door using a shovel and a metal bucket, pulling snow inside and packing it into the corners where it would melt later. It was exhausting work, and the tunnel they created seemed to go on forever, snow packed tight as stone by the wind and the weight of more snow above it. After hours of labor, Kenneth's shovel suddenly broke through into daylight. Fresh air rushed in, so cold it burned their lungs, but sweet and clear. They had created an opening about the size of a barrel, just enough to climb through if needed. "We could try to get to town," Katrina said, staring at the circle of white sky visible through the tunnel. Kenneth shook his head. "Not yet. Look at how deep this is. We are under at least 8 feet of snow, and we do not know if the storm is really over or just resting. Give it another day." Katrina knew he was right, but the taste of fresh air and the glimpse of the outside world made the cabin feel even smaller. They sealed the tunnel with a blanket to keep the warmth in, but left a small gap for ventilation. That night they talked about the future, tentatively at first, then with growing boldness. "When this is over and we get to town, what will you do?" Katrina asked. "I suppose I will still look for that job at the Morrison Ranch. I need work." Kenneth hesitated. "But I was thinking if you needed help here with your ranch, I could stay on for a while. Help you get things in order before I move on." Katrina's heart clenched at the words "move on," but she tried to keep her voice neutral. "I could use the help, but I could not pay you much. Room and board would be enough, and maybe—" He trailed off. "Maybe what?" "Maybe the chance to see where this goes, between us." Kenneth took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I have never felt like this before, Katrina. Like I found something I did not know I was looking for." "I feel it too, but I am scared. What if we are just holding on to each other because we are trapped here? What if it is not real? Does this feel real to you?" Kenneth cupped her face in his hands, his eyes searching hers. "Yes," Katrina whispered. "Then trust it. Trust this." He kissed her again, and this time there was a promise in it, a future beyond the cabin and the snow and the fear. They made love that night in Katrina's small bed, gentle and tender, discovering each other in the flickering firelight. Afterward, Katrina lay in his arms and felt something she had not felt since before Danielle died. She felt hope. The 8th day dawned clear and brutally cold. Through their small tunnel, they could see blue sky, the kind of piercing winter blue that hurt to look at. Kenneth widened the opening and climbed out, then reached back to help Katrina up into the blinding white world. The snow had transformed everything. The landscape was unrecognizable, buried under drifts that had sculpted the land into strange new shapes. The stable was completely covered, only the stone chimney of the cabin visible above the snow to mark where the building stood. In the distance, the mountains glittered like diamonds in the sun, My God, Katrina breathed. I have never seen anything like this. We will need snowshoes to get anywhere, Kenneth said, surveying the scene. And we should wait one more day to make sure the weather holds. The last thing we want is to get caught in another storm. They spent the day preparing. Kenneth fashioned crude snowshoes from branches and rope he found in the stable, which they had also dug a tunnel to access. Juniper was fine, though clearly confused by all the disruption. They packed a bag with supplies for the trek to town, including blankets in case they needed to hole up along the way. That night, their last night sealed in together, they talked about everything and nothing. Kenneth told her about his dreams of one day owning land again, a place that was truly his. Katrina confessed her fear of failing to honor her family's legacy. They made plans tentatively at first, then with growing certainty. Stay, Katrina said in the quiet hours before dawn. Not just for a while. Stay and help me build this ranch into something real. We could do it together. Kenneth was silent for so long that Katrina began to regret asking. Then he said, "Are you sure? You barely know me. What if I am not the man you think I am? I know enough. I know you are kind and strong and honest. I know you make me feel less alone. I know that when I think about the future, I want you in it. I want that too, more than I have wanted anything in a long time." Kenneth pulled her closer. "Yes, I will stay if you will have me. I will have you." On the 9th day, they set out for town. The journey that normally took 2 hours on horseback took them 6 hours on snowshoes, breaking trail through the deep drifts. They had to stop frequently to rest, and once Kenneth broke through a weak spot in the snow and plunged up to his chest, but they pulled him out and kept going. Redding, when they finally reached it, was a bustle of activity. The town had been snowed in as well, and people were digging out, checking on neighbors, assessing damage. The blizzard had been historic, people said. 9 days of snow, wind that had torn roofs off buildings, temperatures that had frozen anything left outside solid as iron. Kenneth and Katrina made their way to the general store, where Mrs. Patterson exclaimed over them like they were ghosts risen from the grave. "We thought anyone caught outside town was surely dead. 9 days. How did you survive?" "We had shelter and supplies," Katrina said simply, not mentioning how close it had been at times. "And we helped each other." News spread quickly in a small town. By evening, half of Redding knew that the Ellis girl had been snowed in with a stranger for 9 days and had emerged very much together. There was gossip, of course, raised eyebrows and whispered speculation, but there was also understanding. Survival made its own rules, and no one could fault two people for finding comfort in such extreme circumstances. Kenneth did go to the Morrison Ranch, but not to ask for a job as a ranch hand. Instead, he negotiated to buy supplies on credit, promising to pay it back with work over the next year. James Morrison, a gruff but fair man in his 50s, looked between Kenneth and Katrina and seemed to understand the situation. "You planning to make an honest go of the Ellis place?" Morrison asked Kenneth. "Yes, sir. With Miss Ellis's permission, I aim to help her build it into a proper ranch." Morrison studied them both, then nodded. "The Ellis family was good people. Ben Ellis helped me when I first came to these parts, gave me advice that saved my operation. I would be pleased to see his land worked by people who care about it." He extended his hand to Kenneth. "You get that ranch running, and I will buy your cattle at fair prices." "Deal, deal," Kenneth said, shaking firmly. They married 3 months later in the spring when the snow had finally melted and the meadows around the cabin turned green and gold with wildflowers. It was a small ceremony in the church in town, attended by the few friends Katrina had, and the people Kenneth had gotten to know through his work. Mrs. Patterson cried, declaring it the most romantic thing she had ever seen. Two people brought together by a blizzard. Katrina wore a dress that had been her mother's, simple white cotton with lace at the collar. Kenneth wore his only suit, brushed clean and pressed. When the preacher asked if they took each other for better or worse, they answered with absolute certainty, having already lived through some of the worst together. The ranch grew slowly but steadily over the next few years. Kenneth's knowledge and Katrina's determination proved to be a powerful combination. They added cattle, repaired fences, built a new barn. Kenneth was good with his hands, able to fix almost anything, and Katrina learned alongside him, becoming skilled at tasks she had never thought herself capable of. They hired a hand when they could afford it, a young man named Thomas who reminded Katrina a bit of how Danielle might have been if she had been a boy, all quick grins and easy laughter. Having another person around helped ease the workload and made the place feel more like the bustling home it had been when Katrina's parents were alive. Kenneth never did go back for that dog in Montana, but 2 years after the blizzard, a stray wandered onto their property, a skinny mutt with one torn ear and ribs showing through his coat. Kenneth fed him, and the dog stayed, becoming a loyal guardian of the ranch and a devoted follower of the man who had shown him kindness. In the winter of 1885, their first child was born, a son they named Benjamin after Katrina's father. Kenneth held the tiny, red-faced infant with a mixture of terror and wonder, and Katrina saw tears in his eyes. "I never thought I would have this," he said quietly. "A family, a home. I thought I was meant to drift forever." "You found your way home," Katrina told him, exhausted but happy. "We found each other." They had 2 more children over the next few years, a daughter named Alina in 1887 and another son, Samuel, in 1890. The cabin that had once housed 2 people trapped by a blizzard expanded with added rooms, growing to accommodate the life blooming within its walls. Sometimes, in the winter when the snow fell, Katrina would stand at the window and remember those 9 days sealed away from the world. She remembered the fear and the cold and the uncertainty. But mostly she remembered the moment she had decided to trust, to open her heart to a stranger who had stumbled into her life when she needed him most. Kenneth would often find her at the window on those snowy days and wrap his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her head. "Thinking about the blizzard?" he would ask. "Always," she would reply. "It gave me everything." He would turn her to face him, cupping her face the way he had that first night they kissed, and say, "It gave me everything too." The ranch prospered over the decades. Benjamin grew into a serious young man who loved the land as much as his parents did. Alina inherited her aunt's quick wit and her mother's determination. Samuel had his father's way with animals and his mother's quiet strength. They all knew the story of the blizzard, how their parents had met and fallen in love during 9 days sealed away from the world. In 1903, Kenneth and Katrina stood together at Danielle's grave on a clear spring morning. They had moved her from the small plot near the cabin to the family cemetery they had established on a hill overlooking the ranch. Katrina laid wildflowers on the stone, the same kind that had bloomed the day she and Kenneth married. "I wish she could have known you," Katrina said softly. "She would have liked you. I wish I could have known her too, but I feel like I do, a little, through your stories." Kenneth took Katrina's hand, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing after 20 years together. "You think she would be proud of what you have done here?" Katrina looked out over the land, at the sturdy buildings and fat cattle, at the home they had built together through hard work and love. She thought about the scared young woman she had been, alone and uncertain, watching a stranger struggle through the snow toward her cabin. She thought about how much courage it had taken to open that door, to let someone in, to trust in the possibility of something better. "Yes," she said finally. "I think she would be proud." They walked back to the house hand in hand, an easy silence between them. The children would be home soon. Alina from the teaching position she held in town, Benjamin from checking the northern fence line, Samuel from wherever he had wandered off to with the dogs. The house would fill with noise and life, the good chaos of a family that loved each other. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Kenneth and Katrina sat on the porch in the rocking chairs he had built, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine and grass and the promise of summer. "You ever miss it?" Katrina asked. "The drifting, the freedom of going wherever you wanted." Kenneth considered the question seriously, as he always did her queries. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it, the lack of responsibility, but I do not miss the loneliness. And I do not miss being untethered, floating through life without an anchor." He reached over and took her hand. "You are my anchor, Katrina. You and the children and this place. You are home." Katrina squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses that matched her own, the strength that had never failed her. "You saved me, you know. When you came stumbling through that blizzard, I was drowning in grief and isolation, and I did not even know it. You saved me." "We saved each other," Kenneth corrected gently. "You could have turned me away that night. It would have been the safer choice, the easier choice. But you opened your door and your heart, and that changed both our lives." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from years of shared experiences and deep understanding. The ranch settled into its nighttime rhythms around them, the soft lowing of cattle, the hoot of an owl in the trees, the gentle creaking of the house as it cooled. "Tell me again," Katrina said softly. "Tell me about that first moment you saw the cabin." Kenneth smiled, knowing she loved this story, needed to hear it sometimes to remind herself how far they had come. "I thought I was hallucinating at first. The cold does that sometimes, makes you see things that are not there. But then I saw smoke from the chimney, and I knew it was real. And then I saw you at the window, this fierce woman with a rifle, watching me struggle. I remember thinking, if I die out here, at least I will die knowing someone saw me, someone witnessed my last fight, and then you opened the door." "I was so scared," Katrina admitted, "of the storm, of being alone, of you, but something told me to help you anyway. Your courage saved us both that night, and every day since." Kenneth stood and pulled her gently to her feet. "Come, let us go to bed. Tomorrow is another long day." They walked inside together, checking on each sleeping child as they always did, making sure the fire was banked properly, securing the doors. The routines of a life well lived, shared tasks that had become sacred through repetition. In their room, the room that had once been barely separated from the main cabin by a thin curtain, they prepared for sleep. Katrina brushed out her long hair, now streaked with silver, while Kenneth changed into his nightclothes. They had done this thousands of times, but there was still comfort in it, still intimacy in these quiet moments. "I love you," Katrina said as they settled into bed, the words as necessary as breathing even after all these years. "I love you too," Kenneth replied, pulling her close. "Always have from that first night. I just did not have the words for it yet." Katrina nestled against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She thought about the young woman she had been, terrified and alone in a cabin in the wilderness. She thought about the stranger who had crashed into her life on a wave of snow and wind and changed everything. She thought about the choice she had made to trust, to love, to believe in the possibility of happiness even after loss. The blizzard had sealed the door for 9 days, trapping them together in a space barely large enough for two. But what they had found in that enforced intimacy was not confinement but freedom. Freedom from loneliness, from fear, from the belief that they had to face the world alone. They had emerged from those 9 days changed, transformed by shared survival and unexpected love. And they had spent the next 20 years proving that what they had found in the storm was not temporary shelter, but a lasting home. Years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow as all years do. They lost Thomas, their faithful ranch hand, to pneumonia in 1907 and mourned him as part of their family. They celebrated when Benjamin married a schoolteacher from Sacramento and brought her home to the ranch. They watched Alina fall in love with a doctor from San Francisco, and though it broke their hearts a little to see her move away, they were happy for her happiness. Samuel, their youngest, stayed on the ranch, inheriting his father's love for the land and his mother's fierce determination to protect it. He married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread, and together they began the process of expanding the operation into the next generation. In 1915, Kenneth and Katrina celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a party that filled the ranch house to bursting. Friends came from all over the county, some who had known them since before the blizzard, others who had watched their family grow over the decades. Mrs. Patterson, now elderly and using a cane, made the trip from town to embrace them both and declare, once again, that theirs was the greatest love story she had ever known. 30 years, Kenneth marveled that night after the guests had departed and they were alone on the porch once more. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I know exactly what you mean. Katrina leaned her head on his shoulder. Sometimes I still feel like that scared girl watching you stumble through the snow. Other times it feels like we have always been together, like I cannot remember a version of myself that did not include you. That is how love works, I think. It exists outside of normal time. Those 9 days in the cabin, they were both the longest and shortest days of my life. The longest because we did not know if we would survive. The shortest because I never wanted them to end, never wanted to leave that small space where it was just you and me against the world. Katrina lifted her head to look at him. Even in the dim light of the porch lantern, she could see the boy he had been and the man he had become. Gray now threaded through his dark hair, and lines creased his face, but his eyes were the same, that creek water green that had watched her with such understanding and compassion on that first terrible, wonderful night. "We are growing old," she observed with a soft laugh. "We are growing old together," Kenneth corrected. "That is all that matters." He was right, as he often was. They had built a life that mattered, raised children who would carry on their legacy, created something lasting and true. The ranch that Katrina had feared losing, that she had struggled to maintain alone, now thrived as a testament to what two people could accomplish when they worked together, loved together, dreamed together. In 1920, Katrina's health began to fail. It started with a cough that would not go away, then fatigue that deepened no matter how much she rested. The doctor from town, a younger man who had taken over from the old physician, examined her gravely and told Kenneth privately that her heart was wearing out. "How long?" Kenneth asked, his own heart breaking at the thought of a world without her. "Months, maybe a year if she is careful. I am sorry." Kenneth did not tell Katrina what the doctor had said, but she knew anyway. She had always been able to read him, to see past whatever walls he tried to construct. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and rose, she took his hand and said, "I am not afraid." "I am," Kenneth admitted, his voice rough. "I am terrified. I do not know how to be in this world without you." The same way I would have had to learn if you had not made it to the cabin that night, one day at a time, with the love we shared holding you up." Katrina squeezed his hand. "You have given me 37 years of happiness, Kenneth. 37 years more than I thought I would have when Danielle died and I was alone. That is a gift beyond measure. It is not enough. I want 37 more years. I want forever. We have forever. Love does not end just because a heart stops beating. I will always be with you." She lasted 8 more months, long enough to see the birth of Benjamin's third child, a daughter they named Katrina in her honor. Long enough to tell each of her children how proud she was of them, how much she loved them. Long enough to sit with Kenneth one last time on the porch as spring arrived, bringing with it the wildflowers that bloomed eternal on the hillsides. "Remember me like this," she said softly, her hand in his as it had been so many times before. "Not sick, not fading. Remember me young and fierce with a rifle, opening the door to a stranger in a blizzard. Remember me dancing at our wedding. Remember me holding our babies for the first time. Remember the good days." "I will remember it all," Kenneth promised through his tears. Every single moment was a gift. Katrina Ellis Garrett died on a warm spring morning in 1921, surrounded by her family and holding the hand of the man who had loved her for nearly 4 decades. Her last words were, "Thank you for finding me." Kenneth buried her next to Danielle on the hill overlooking the ranch, and he planted wildflowers between their graves so they would bloom together every spring. He continued to run the ranch with Samuel's help, though his heart was not truly in it anymore. He went through the motions, but everyone could see that part of him had gone with Katrina. He lasted 2 more years, 2 years of waking each morning and remembering she was gone, 2 years of eating meals alone and sleeping in a bed that felt too large and too empty. The children tried to comfort him, but there was no comfort for a loss so profound. In the winter of 1923, a blizzard swept down from the mountains, the worst storm to hit the region since the legendary storm of 1883. Samuel wanted his father to stay with them in the main house, but Kenneth insisted on going to the old cabin, the original building that had been preserved even as the ranch expanded around it. "I want to be there," was all he would say. Samuel helped him get settled, made sure he had firewood and supplies, and promised to check on him as soon as the storm passed. Kenneth sat in the chair by the fire, the same chair he had sat in 40 years ago, and watched the snow pile up against the windows. He thought about Katrina, about that first night when she had saved his life by opening her door. He thought about 9 days sealed away from the world, falling in love in a space barely large enough for 2. He thought about a lifetime of shared joys and sorrows, of building something beautiful together. As the wind howled and the snow buried the cabin, Kenneth closed his eyes and smiled. He could almost feel her there beside him, young and fierce and full of life. He could almost hear her voice saying, "I am here. I am always here." They found him 3 days later when the storm cleared, sitting peacefully in the chair by the fire, which had long since gone cold. There was a smile on his face, and in his hand was a small carved wooden horse, something he had made for Katrina in their first year together, a replacement for the horse he had lost in the blizzard. Samuel buried his father next to his mother on the hill, and the whole county came to pay their respects to the man who had loved so deeply and so well. The preacher spoke of commitment and devotion, of 2 lives intertwined so completely that one could not exist without the other. But it was young Katrina, Benjamin's daughter, who had been named for her grandmother, who perhaps understood it best. She was only 3 years old, but at the funeral she looked up at her father with solemn eyes and said, "Grandpa went to find Grandma. They are together now." And perhaps she was right. Perhaps somewhere beyond the veil of this world, 2 souls found each other again, reunited by a love that had survived blizzards and time and even death itself. The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations, a testament to what Kenneth and Katrina had built together. The old cabin was preserved as a landmark, and children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren heard the story of the blizzard that sealed the door for 9 days and brought two lost souls together. It became a legend in the family, a reminder that sometimes the worst circumstances can lead to the greatest blessings, that opening your door to a stranger might mean opening your heart to love, that 9 days of survival can transform into a lifetime of happiness. And every winter when the first snow fell, the descendants of Kenneth Garrett and Katrina Ellis would look out their windows and remember. They would remember courage and kindness, fear and faith, and the transformative power of a love that began in a blizzard and lasted beyond forever. The story of the cowboy and the stranger who emerged from those 9 days changed was more than just family history. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the courage it takes to trust, and the profound truth that sometimes the greatest adventures begin not when we set out to find them, but when we open our doors to let them in.